Morning, everybody. Happy everyone's on strike today, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's political correspondent, Ashley Cowburn. Morning, Ash.
Morning.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast, morning, Mike, we'll just have to down tools, morning, Daniel, and see if everyone else does the same as well. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed, not on today's strikes, which we'll get to in a bit, but allegations about the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, who, as you may know, is being investigated about bullying his staff, reportedly. Now, these allegations seem to have turned into 24 people making complaints about his behaviour. And here we have former co-workers who are basically accusing him of, how can we put it, of basically being like domestic abuse in the workplace, Ash, fundamentally, saying that it's like being in an abusive relationship, having him as their boss. Can you take us through it? What's being said?
Yes, this is a story from our political editor, John, who said that witnesses who spoke to him suggested that civil servants suffered breakdowns and that sometimes felt suicidal. They suggested it was a controlling, abusing relationship. Witnesses said he would belittle and demean staff. I think one source told John as well he changes his behaviour depending on whether you're a civil servant he has control over or another government minister. I mean, of course, Raab's spokesman has declined to comment, pointing to the independent inquiry that's going on at the moment. But he's previously said that he has behaved professionally at all times and that the government takes a zero-tolerance approach to bullying. I mean, in total, he's facing 8 complaints of bullying across the civil service, involving at least 24 staff that we are aware of. The Liberal Democrats and the FDA union, which represents senior civil servants, are both calling for him to be suspended while the inquiry is carried out. I mean, the issue is we just don't know how long this inquiry is going to last at the moment. I mean, it's the inquiry into Nadeem Zahawi only lasted 6 days, but this has been going on. Well, it was first announced in November when the allegations first came to light. Now, at the time, of course, the Prime Minister didn't have an ethics advisor because the one Boris Johnson previously had resigned. So he appointed Adam Tolley QC, who's investigating this case, and we don't know if he's paying a day-to-day rate or what's going on there. But he is going through the allegations, methodically speaking to senior civil servants. I think there are reports today that at least 2 permanent secretaries have been spoken to about the witnesses' reports. And we'll have to wait and see the conclusions of that report.
It's all going to be, yes. Well, Dominic, I'm sure he's saying please and thank you to a lot of people at the moment. I mean, I would be if I was facing 24 allegations of being a bit snippy, although it is a bit more than snippy. people are left being suicidal, talking about breakdowns, talking about abuse almost in the workplace, that he was coming up really with rules and regulations for them to follow and comply with, which then changed and stopped, and he changed his mind, and they didn't work. And to say you must do this and then suddenly you don't, it is probably a bit triggering for some people who have had experience of domestic abuse. Sure. But there's this other highly damaging bit for Rishi Sunak, which has emerged this morning, which is that apparently Number 10 was alerted to some of these allegations before he appointed Raab as his deputy. Now, Raab backed Sunak in the leadership campaign. He clearly felt he needed him on his team, and so he seems to have overlooked it all. But Ash, what struck me is that Number 10 is saying he wasn't personally told about the allegations, but there was an alert raised somehow with somebody somewhere in some form about his concerns, although at the time they weren't formal complaints. But the thing is, isn't it, that as soon as someone raises vague concerns, and let's say, for example, about Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs like 6 years ago, as soon as you put that person in a position of power or influence, some of those concerns are highly likely to become very concrete allegations pretty quickly. I mean, that's just a case of having some political nous and seeing which way the wind's going to blow on that one. Why didn't Rishi, having heard that there were some concerns, why didn't he think, best not, best make him a junior minister, best move him to the side, best make him party chairman, best do something else with him rather than making him my deputy?
I think it's important to remember that Dominic Raab was one of Rishi Sunak's first backers in the leadership race in the summer. They're quite a close, unlike Nadeem Zahawi, they have quite a close political affinity. He stood by him during Liz Truss's premiership and was one of his first backers when Liz Truss's government imploded. Whereas Nadeem Zahawi sort of backed Liz Truss all the way through the summer. And then as soon as Liz Truss's government fell, he then backed Boris Johnson in an op-ed for The Telegraph just
for an evening.
Even when Boris Johnson was pulling out the race. So, I mean, Dominic Raab and Rishi Sunak are a lot closer in political terms. And I think standing on the steps of Downing Street on his first day in office, Rishi Sunak promised integrity in government after years of Boris Johnson. And I think he's aware that if he's forced to sack Dominic Raab, it would be extremely damaging for his government. But I also think it's worth pointing out the sort of bravery of the civil servants coming forward, because I don't know if you remember 2 years ago when Priti Patel, the then Home Secretary, she was subject to bullying allegations at the Home Office too. And then the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson ordered a bullying inquiry by his independent advisor, who reported back that she had broken the ministerial code. What happened then? Boris Johnson overruled his advisor. He messaged Tory MPs on a WhatsApp group saying, stand square behind the Pritster. So it's amazing that these civil servants actually feel they can come forward and put these allegations forward against some of the most powerful people in the country, and Boris Johnson completely undermined the system at the time.
Exactly. The precedent for this actually being fixed is pretty grim. You've got to have some trust, I suppose, in Sunak to do the right thing. Perhaps that's why they're coming forward. Now, get into the comments. Ask us your questions. These are just allegations about Raab at the moment. But do you think that while they're being investigated, he should still be Deputy Prime Minister? Do you think he should still be the Justice Secretary in charge of the government department that's literally supposed to be sorting out the prosecutions for controlling and coercive behaviour throughout the country? Now, Denise says, if he's bullying, he should go. But on the other hand, people today are too soft. Snowflakes come to mind. Stand up for yourself and answer back. Put your health first, not your job. Life's too short to be unhappy in your job. Move on. Denise, I feel you, and I see from your picture we're probably roughly of an age. And I had a long chat yesterday with some of my journalism students who are 20 years younger than me. And I had exactly this conversation. I said, when I was your age, you put up with stuff and you soak up stuff that perhaps you shouldn't do. And that you should say, no, this isn't okay, and I'm going to be tougher about things. But we have the luxury of being ladies in our middle years who are, perhaps you've had your children, perhaps you've just decided you no longer give a toss, a bit like me, and you've decided that you can go out and be a bit tougher about stuff. But when you're 20-something, when you're Ashley's age, perhaps, when you're starting out in your career, it's really difficult, isn't it, Ash, to take someone who is your boss and to stand up to them. I mean, there's ways of doing it, but it's not just a case of being a snowflake. It's a case of being more junior. Often, isn't it? It's the power dynamic that stops people speaking out, not being a snowflake.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I just don't really think this argument of snowflakes is even relevant, to be honest. I mean, these civil servants are complaining about breakdowns and feeling suicidal. I think the civil service should take these extremely seriously. And I mean, these people work for years to get into these roles. They sacrifice quite a lot, and the civil service is taking them seriously. And I think we'll see how that goes. But I don't think it's appropriate to be calling people snowflakes who are bringing forward allegations of bullying in the workplace.
No, and until we know the detail of those allegations, we don't know if, he merely asked them to tidy up their paper clips or if he was genuinely riding them just far too hard in the office. We don't know, but I'm sure if there's 24, there are going to be some fairly serious ones in there. Now, Mike says, Johnson made the raising of official complaints by officials impossible with his Patel let-off. Such complaints would most likely backfire on the person making the complaint. And now Sunak says he wasn't directly told. It's Johnson-level deflection. I mean, Mike's just sort of answered our last point there a bit, which is that people didn't feel they could be believed in the last couple of years, and so therefore they probably swallowed more stuff than they might otherwise have done. But then you've got this fact that he's almost like Boris Johnson going, well, no one told me about it, or they didn't say it was written down complaint, it wasn't formal, so there's nothing I could do about it, which is a bit, it's not quite deflection. I disagree with Mike there. I think that's more like how Sunak handled the Nadeem Zahawi allegations, more in a way of being, well, this is the professional way we do things in the HR department. We need to go through due process, and tick this particular box on the spreadsheet. And he's doing something similar here, which is that if the complaint isn't formal, there's really nothing I can do about it. Otherwise, they could sue us for unfair dismissal or something, which doesn't work with government ministers, of course.
Yeah, I think a columnist made a good point the other day. He's acting sort of like a sort of consultant management boss of the firm, bringing in sort of moral auditors to his government to investigate. I think Jake Berry, the former Tory chairman under Liz Truss, made a good point on Question Time last week. He was suggesting that once ministers are subject to these sort of really serious allegations, they should be put on suspension. Sort of a mechanism should be in place so they can be investigated while not serving in the post. And if they are cleared by the investigation, they can come back to their role, which I think is important, because in most workplaces across the country, if you were subject to these sort of allegations, I don't think you'd be sharing an office with your colleagues the next day.
No, you'd be on gardening leave, wouldn't you? It'd be, go and be somewhere else for a bit, work from home. And there'd be a lot of people obviously supervising you quite closely, I would have thought.
And it's also important to point out today that is Rishi Sunak's 100 days as Tory leader. So it's 100 days since the days of Liz Truss now. And in that time, you've had Gavin Williamson, who's another close political colleague of Rishi Sunak. He was forced to resign over bullying allegations in the first few weeks of Rishi Sunak's premiership. He's appointed Suella Braverman as Home Secretary days after she resigned from Liz Truss's government over breaking the ministerial code. He's had to force Nadeem Zahawi to quit as party chair over the row of his tax affairs. And now his deputy prime minister is subject to 8 allegations of bullying from 24 members of staff. So it's not a great record after 100 days in office.
No, you'd think, I can still vaguely remember what Tony Blair wanted to achieve in his first 100 days in office. And I want to tick off this and this and this and this, and I'll do that. And you really want the first 100 days to go pretty smoothly and look good. Bit difficult, of course, when you take over a ship that's already hit the iceberg. Now, before we move on to another story, as you said earlier on, Sunak didn't have any choice but to order this inquiry when they were first made, these allegations, when we thought there were just 8 of them, because he didn't have an ethics advisor. He gave it to a QC. It's going to take months to get to the bottom of it and interview everybody concerned and all the rest of it. And despite the fact that Raab has said he will rebut and refute all these allegations thoroughly, he can't comment. And he's not commenting until everything is over. So we've got this situation where we've just had Sunak make himself look really weak by waiting 6 days to sack Nadeem Zahawi. Can he really afford, in his situation? I mean, someone's just sent me a tweet of him, Rishi Sunak earlier, and it's a plate of wobbly jelly. Can he really afford to wait any longer to get rid of someone when there are these sort of headlines coming out about him? Can he afford to have months, weeks, maybe months of these headlines about how awful Raab is to work for when he's in charge of, and I'm going to say it again, prosecuting actual, perpetrators of controlling and coercive behaviour?
It's a very good point. I mean, I do think he's gonna, for the time being, he is gonna stand by Dominic Raab just because of how close they are. But I think the point about jelly on a plate was made by Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions before Christmas, and I think it's quite an effective point. And I'm sure we'll probably hear the same words from Keir Starmer at the dispatch box facing Rishi Sunak today, who will inevitably stonewall questions about the investigation while the process is ongoing. But I do think the longer it lingers on, the more damaging it gets for Rishi Sunak, because he is this sort of description of him being weak is starting to catch on. And we're even getting, I think it was Michael Portillo at the weekend, the former Tory cabinet minister, suggesting that waiting so long to sack Nadeem Sahawi showed the Prime Minister to be weak. And it's not just Labour that are saying this. And the more that catches on, the more this investigation lingers, I think the more damaging it becomes to the Prime Minister. But then at the same time, and the political challenges with that is, if he is forced to sack the deputy prime minister, I mean, the political repercussions of that are massive too.
Exactly. I think if you had Spitting Image on mainstream telly now, as opposed to just on BritBox, they may well have a Rishi Sunak puppet that just melts every 5 minutes. What a melt! So we'll have to see how that all pans out, of course, but it's not looking good for Sunak or Raab. Now, we do need to move on to another story. So get into the comments and questions. Have you had problems with the boss at work? What happened? Did you get your justice, or did they have their justice? Have you been the victim of complaints that just weren't justified by snowflakes? Do let us know. But first off, on to other stuff. Across the country today, there are multiple strikes by the rail unions, university lecturers, civil servants, border staff, and today, for the first time in years, teachers too, who just all coincidentally have decided to go out on the 1st of February. Now, there seems to be pretty broad support for it all, particularly for teachers who are just starting the first day of 7 days of strikes that are penciled in for them the next couple of months. Ash, what's your sense of how this is all going to sort of turn out? Are the unions smelling blood, think they're close to getting a pay deal, or is the government really hunkering down and just determined not to give an inch? How long is it all going to go on for?
You don't get the sense. I mean, the RMT union, for example, the rail union, is currently discussing a pay deal that was offered by the rail network. That one does seem to be making progress, but for the rest of them, I mean, today you've got 70,000 university staff, tens of thousands of teachers, 100,000 civil servants from 124 government departments. I mean, that's affecting everything from pensions, passports, benefits, the UK Space Agency, the Home Office, Border Force. And then at the same time, you've also got the ASLEF union, which is train drivers. This
is a live feed from their picket line in London today. Paddington Station's completely empty. Half the stations are empty, actually, it's got to be said.
Yeah, so I think 98% of train drivers are represented by ASLEF. So it means most of the trains are off in the country today. I mean, the NHS isn't striking today, but that's next week. The quite a major day of strikes on the 6th of February with nurses and ambulance workers. But you don't get the sense that the strike negotiations are going forward in any way. I mean, at the beginning of January, these union leaders were going into government discussing with relevant ministers their disputes. But you do get the sense it's starting to go backwards a little bit, actually.
Really? But the strikes are getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get the sense that the negotiations over pay are getting anywhere, especially with the health unions and the university staff and teachers. They're having these discussions with government ministers, but they don't seem to be going anywhere.
No, they really do need to get to the point where they're able to make a deal. It does seem like some of the unions and the bosses are saying, well, we'll take this, we'll take that, we'll come down a bit. You need to negotiate. Let's have that talk. And the government's just, no. One of the things that was said today by the Education Secretary, whoever she is these days, on the radio this morning, Gillian Keegan, was that we'll be spending more money in future, which is exactly what Boris Johnson used to do, isn't it? He used to say, we're going to have billions of this and billions of that. And you were very much left with the impression that it was happening today. But in fact, if you look at the small print, it was 10 years hence when he was never going to be in power. That's not going to be a way to end the strike, saying we'll give you some more money on the never at some point. Just shut up and get back to work.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think also like the public opinion, I don't think is waning for the strike action either. I think you're seeing in the last fortnight, I think it was 40,000 teachers, members have joined the National Education Union. So they're obviously very concerned about their pay there. But I think going forward, the government has obviously said it's deeply concerning what's going on and warning unions not to do this and come in for talks. But the government is refusing to negotiate pay. I mean, they keep referring back to the independent pay review body, which offered its pay increase last year. And as long as they're not willing to discuss that central issue, you're not going to get an agreement.
No.
So there's going to have to be movement to end these strikes.
There's going to have to be something, isn't there, somewhere? Now, get into the comments, ask us your questions. If you've been affected by the strikes today, the teachers going out is probably going to affect far more people than, for example, the train strikes have done, especially with the working from home thing that's been going on since the pandemic. How are you coping with homeschooling? What's been happening? But when you hear, remember that millions of children aren't at school today and thousands of schools are closed, I'd just like to think about one particular thing. Lots of those schools are still open. Many teachers are at work and they are teaching today in classes, despite the strike action, the children who are classified as vulnerable and children of key workers. They're still doing that, all right, despite the fact that there's this strike going on. Because, you know, as the pandemic told us, there are quite a lot of key workers and they are quite important to make sure they can still go to work. Haven't got to take a day off in order to sort out homeschooling and things like that. Now, I know one or two key workers who could have invoked their right to have a child at school today, but either they're striking too and don't feel they can or should, or they want to support the strike and say, well, no, I'll have my child at home. It's absolutely fine. They don't want to sort of cross the picket line, as it were. Not that taking your child to school is crossing a picket line. But not everyone can do that, of course. Some people, they have to take their children to the school today. Some people are just taking the time off work to look after their children. And remember, every single person who is striking is losing a day's pay, which means they are even more broke than they were before they went out on strike. And it means that the economy, which is already suffering and apparently can't afford to pay them, is going to suffer even more. So, Ash, the question here that I'm going to get to in a minute is that paying these people some sort of a deal would actually cost the economy and cost us all in the long run a lot less than what we're losing in terms of the money that's going around the system and the amount of hours that have been lost working and stuff like that. Letting these strikes go on is a sort of self-fulfilling sort of prophecy of doom for a government that's trying to turn the economy back round again.
I mean, you had Hugh Merriman, one of the rail ministers, was at the Transport Select Committee last week or the week before, and he was asked about the cost of the rail strikes, and he admitted that the cost of allowing the strikes to go ahead, the impact on the whole economy. So in December, in the build up to Christmas, you had sort of multi-billion-pound impact on the retail services and the UK hospitality. And he admitted that the cost of that was more than the cost of negotiating the pay over the unions, which was quite a big admission from a government minister. And you are going to see, as these strikes progress, I mean, obviously the rail strikes have been going on for a long time now, since last summer. But as the other unions come out now, they're obviously, some of them are just announcing the results of their ballots. And I think university staff are on their second day of strike action. You've got civil service. It's the first time all civil service, all 100,000 since the ballot in November, first time all of them are going out on the same day. So you are going to see, I mean, the cumulative impact on the economy of these strikes is going to be huge. And it comes the day after the IMF was warning that the UK is set to be one of the worst growing developed countries on the world.
Yeah, I think it boils down to really whether the government can blame all the economic woes on the strikes, and therefore when we're all broke next year, can say, and businesses are going bust and stuff, say, well, that's the strikes for you, it's all the militants' fault. Or whether actually, I think it's because we all know it was Liz Truss, and actually that actually the general public and the voter are actually pinning it on the government instead.
Yeah.
And whether the government can change the blame, I don't think they've probably got the comms machine that's up to that job, but we shall have to see, won't we, how it all pans out. Right, keep asking your questions, everybody. How do you feel about the Deputy Prime Minister facing these bullying allegations and still being at work while they're investigated? Do you think Rishi Sunak can afford to wait weeks or months before he inevitably has to get rid of his political ally? How do you feel about how do you feel about the strikes? Have you been affected by them? Are you out on strike? How do you feel about the fact that children aren't at school today? Get into the comments and let us know, and we'll do our best to wrap up at the end. But first off, we have found some good news for you, and here it is. Now, I want you to meet Alan Sugar. This is an entrepreneurial schoolboy who is setting up his own business empire selling sweets. Who needs school, Ash? Luke Scotney, he's only 11. He has a severe nut allergy and he found it very difficult to source sweets that were safe for him to eat. So, spotting a gap in the market, he has launched a brand of allergen-free sweeties and is already making 500 quid a month. Why didn't I do this, Ash? He says the money's great, but it's about providing sweets that people trust that brings him real pleasure. Ash, is this proof that just about anybody can enjoy the sweet smell of success? You don't even need to have disease.
Yeah, I was laughing at this headline this morning, Haribo Selector. I think it's a great story, isn't it? I mean, £500 a month. I think he perhaps will be seeing him on Dragon's Den in the next few years, launching this. I think he says in the story that he's going to sort of try and look out for warehouses to sort of build his brand and his product. He's quite an entrepreneur, 11-year-old. I know inflation has gone up quite a lot since I was 11 years old, but I think I was paid £20 a week for a paper round, which at the time made me feel very rich. And I'm sure he thinks he's probably swimming in it with £500 a week.
Well, there's no tax when you're 11.
Yeah.
But the tax man is coming, Luke. He knows where you are. You're in the paper. As soon as you turn 18, mate, that's it. I remember getting my first paycheck and having the tax coming off. I nearly fell over my chair. What is this? Now, Denise says, this is the lady who commented earlier on about the snowflakes and the bullying, and she's come back and said, I agree with regards to age. I personally don't like confrontation. In the workplace at the age of 30, I had to tell a boss to stop referring to me as his darling. Well done, you, Denise. My husband can call me that. You address me as Mrs. Archer. Friends can call me Denise. Well done, Mrs. Archer, or Denise, however you prefer I speak to you. Quite right. And I do adhere to your idea that everyone should just stand up for themselves a bit, but it's also very difficult sometimes for some people and in some circumstances. Now, Mike says, PMQs is going to be fun today. The delay in sacking a tax dodger and still backing a reported bully looks very bad for him. Keir Starmer is going to have quite a lot of fun, I should imagine. But we've still got, 300 odd days until the next general election has to be called, Ash? It could still get even worse. Maybe Raab could even still be there at the end of all this. Who knows? What would you predict as to what Sunak's going to do about Raab? He's going to have to put him on gardening leave, isn't he?
I don't know. I think if that was the case, he would have already done it, and he would have done it with Nadeem Zahawi and Gavin Williamson. I don't think he's going to be put on gardening leave. I think he's going to wait it out and see what this independent report actually says from the QC later this month.
With very militant civil servants knocking about the place and 8 allegations turning into 24 in the space of a few weeks, I would suggest that those kind of headlines are going to keep coming then. Daniel says, when are the media going to hold these chances to account? What are you watching, Daniel? What do you think we're trying to do? Too many Tory Tufton Street shills allowing propaganda to become the norm. Yes, but we are the media. We're trying to tell you, not everyone reads the Mirror, not everybody watches this, but tell you what, go and spread the word, Daniel. Share it, stick it on your social media, tell everyone to go and buy the Mirror and they'll find this stuff out. Stop buying the Daily Whale and the Daily Telegraph, right? Proper journalism like this. Spread it. Tell everyone, spread the news. And then you can get what you want, because we are trying our best, aren't we, Ash? Anyway. Thanks for all that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Thank you, Denise, and well done. Everyone be a bit more Denise today, I think. And we will be carrying PMQs later on these channels. I think there's going to be live streams from some of the picket lines as well, so keep an eye out for those. We'll come back for PMQs at noon, and we will see you all again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Tatty bye. Thank you.